On March 20th, 2025, the world lost a profoundly special soul. Father Lukas, a Polish priest, died at the age of 40 after a hard and painful fight against an aggressive cancer in stage 4. The news of his death deeply moved his community, which for months had joined in an intense chain of prayer, pleading for his healing, clinging to the hope of a miracle. But God's will was different. His departure left an immense void, but also an indelible mark in the hearts of thousands of people who knew him, followed him, or simply heard about him. Father Lukas was not just any priest. From a very young age, his life was marked by the extraordinary. Those who knew him spoke of a different presence, of an inner peace that radiated something more than serenity. It seemed to walk between the human and the divine. His deep devotion, his way of speaking of God, and above all, the way in which he lived his faith, touched even the hardest-hearted. His life, although short in years, was immensely rich in dedication, sacrifice, mysticism, and pain offered. But his life was also marked by suffering, and not just physical. The cancer that finally took him from this world was just a part of the Calvary he lived. For years, it was full of attacks, slanders, and false accusations that forced him to live away from his religious community. What for many would have been a reason for anger, resentment, or even despair, for him it was an opportunity to join even more to the suffering of Christ. He never responded with hatred. He never sought revenge. On the contrary, he offered every humiliation, every injustice, as an offering to God. His closest community came to attribute his illness not only to natural causes, but also to the constant spiritual and personal attacks that he had received. They felt that evil, unable to bear the light that radiated, sought to silence him. Despite all this, his love for Jesus never wavered. He was a man of Mass, but not just any Mass. The celebrations he presided over were intense, long, deeply spiritual. It was not a ritual. He lived the Mass. He immersed himself in the Eucharistic mystery with a devotion that moved the present. During the consecration, it was common to see him with tears in his eyes, almost trembling by the real presence of Christ in the host. He openly opposed communion by hand and the use of extraordinary ministers of the Eucharist, not out of whim, but out of a deep conviction. He firmly believed that every gesture, every detail, should reflect the deepest respect for the living presence of Jesus. The Mass, for him, was the heart of faith, and should be treated as the most sacred thing on earth. But he was not just a man of liturgy. Father Lukas was also known for his spiritual gifts. Many sought him not only for confession or spiritual direction, but for something more. Through his prayers, dozens of people testified healings that medicine could not explain. Women who could not conceive and then gave birth. People with serious illnesses who found total relief or healing. Others spoke of spiritual liberations, of feeling inner peace after years of anguish, of experiencing a closeness to God that they had never felt. There was even talk of relocation, documented cases where Father Lukas had been seen in 2 places at the same time, praying with someone in private while at the same time he was celebrating Mass elsewhere. And the most surprising thing, visions. Visions of Jesus, who spoke to him, guided him, and revealed messages to strengthen the faith of the believers. Perhaps one of the most impactful aspects of his life was his experience with the stigmas. Every Friday, without exception, Father Lukas revived the Passion of Christ in his body. His hands were bleeding visibly. It was as if he mystically carried the wounds of the Redeemer. Those who witnessed it were deeply moved. It was not a show. He suffered. He cried. He joined the pain of Jesus in a way that overflowed any human explanation. He did not seek attention or recognition. On the contrary, he asked for discretion. But those who saw him never forgot him. It was a living testimony that pain, lived in union with Christ, becomes a source of grace. It did not take long for him to become known outside his country. People from different parts of the world began to write to him, to ask for prayer, to seek him for a word of encouragement or a blessing. Even personalities from the world of the show, such as tenor Andrea Bocelli, sought his spiritual guide. His website became a spiritual refuge for thousands. In it, testimonies, mystical messages, and deep reflections were published that he shared from his experience of prayer. It was a lighthouse for those who walked in the darkness, a voice of hope in the midst of the noise of the world. One of the most shocking moments of his life happened in 2024. As a result of the advance of his illness, Father Lukas fell into a coma for several days. Medically, his situation was critical, but what happened during that time transformed his life, and that of many others, forever. When he woke up, he shared that he had had an experience of heaven. He described a place of unimaginable beauty, where absolute peace reigned. There, he said, Jesus himself spoke to him. He asked him to share that experience with the world, to remind everyone that eternal life is real, that heaven exists, and that it is worth living for it. From that moment on, Father Lukas began to receive other divine messages, including a series of recommendations on the use of exorcised objects, water, salt, and blessed oil, as means of spiritual protection against evil. His community began to give a new value to these sacramentals, following his words with renewed faith. But perhaps the most admirable aspect of his life was his attitude towards suffering. The cancer that consumed him was not a cause of despair, but a cross that he chose to embrace. He said that he offered each pain for the healing of others, for the souls that needed it most, for those who were far from God. Each session of chemotherapy, each sleepless night, each silent cry were for him part of an offering. And so, in the midst of pain, he continued to bless, pray, intercede, console. He turned his own Calvary into a spring of consolation for others. His room in the hospital became a small sanctuary where doctors and nurses approached not only for clinical reasons, but to seek a word, a blessing, a prayer. His death, although deeply painful, was not the end. For many, it was the beginning of a new stage in his mission. From heaven, they believed he would continue to intercede. His tomb began to receive constant visits. Flowers, letters, candles. People who came to thank, to ask, to cry, to offer themselves. His legacy did not die with him. On the contrary, it became stronger. His life and his death were living testimony that holiness is still possible today, even in the midst of a wounded and confused world. That suffering is not in vain when one lives with love. That Jesus continues to call souls willing to love to the extreme. Father Lukas Prus was and is a lighthouse, a chosen soul, an instrument of God in difficult times. And although his absence is felt, his spiritual presence remains alive among those who knew him. His life is an invitation to look beyond, to live deeply, to trust in the midst of pain, and above all, to remember that heaven is real and awaits us. As the days go by since his death, the echo of his life does not cease to resonate. In social networks, old videos of his homilies began to appear, fragments of Mass recorded with telephones, prayers that he had pronounced for anonymous people, who now, between tears, shared how those encounters had changed their lives. They were not montages or exaggerations. They were simple, real testimonies, full of love and gratitude. People who, through him, had felt the closeness of God in a new, profound, transformative way. Even after his death, some testimonies claim to have received favors for his intercession.